The edit header dialog is displayed once you start a new quote. So if you hit new quote, this is the edit header dialog. This is where you can enter in many of the settings that will be used on this specific quote. We have a quote number. In general, that is a number string that will be generated when you hit accept. You could also hand type your own number in there if you want to manually enter it. If you leave it blank, the number will be generated for you. The name is generally used for what you want to use to reference this when you're looking for it. Some people may put in the name of the company and what it is, maybe IBM Sales Meeting or IBM Sales Meeting 2010. Right now, by default, all of our customers start out in the inquiry mode. This can be modified, and we'll go over statuses later on, but in the inquiry mode, inventory will be checked for availability when the quote is opened, but any other quote or element in the system will not see items on this job as creating a conflict. The account manager will be filled in by the settings of your user. You can also override it by either typing in here and looking for a specific user, or by hitting the binoculars and searching for them there. The ship date and the return date are used to configure when the availability of this element will be out and returned. You can click in the date field and go and search for the date. If you make a mistake and put in a prior date and you hit accept, it will notify you that the ship date cannot be after the return date. Under departments, you can create multiple departments, so you can categorize these in the system settings. To configure those, you go to System Settings, Departments. Many people use categorizations such as live event, street rental, tour, sales, things like that. It's just a categorization field. The default time and the default pricing models is where you, as the account manager, can notify the system what you want to charge by default. Right now, we do not auto-calculate these fields. We leave this up to the account manager. In this day and age, many of our shows are a week long with maybe 2 days of live show where it's ship dates and load-in dates and things like that. And so this would be where you would enter in, just say, one day rate and call it good. Your warehouse will be entered in automatically for you, but if you have a multi-site location, you could also search for a different warehouse to scan the gear in and out of, or for check availability for that warehouse. Under the client, you can start to type in the name, and it will auto fill in the clients that match your typed in settings. You can also hit the search binoculars. You can search for them, do a more robust search here, or you can add new contact. This will allow you to add the new contact into the system and as the client to the quote automatically. You won't have to close this down and go back to your contacts and enter the contact just to go back to enter a new quote and start all over again. Same thing with the venue and site. These fields below are logistical information. They don't have anything to do with availability, but just a place to store information such as load-in date, show start, loadout, deposit, things like that. These are very configurable in the system. You can add many different areas for fields that you want to track. You can type in some notes here and select whether those notes will be configurable or not. Well, let's go back into the system settings to let system administrators know what other fields and changes you can do with this area. If we go under Projects, Project Elements, we're going to go to our quote because that's the element that we want to configure. On the first page called Identity and Exposure, This is where you can configure whether you want to use departments. So if you don't want to use departments and not see that combo box, you can turn that field off right there. This setting, department inherited, is if you have a element that has a department, do you want the department setting to be inherited from the parent? Department override enables you to set if the parent element has a department, whether this child quote, you should be able to override that setting from the parent. Naming enabled sets whether you want to have a name field for the element. Again, whether you want to inherit it from the parent. If you're starting with an event folder called IBM Sales Conference 2012, when you create a quote as a child element, whether it should automatically fill in that name for you, and then whether under name override enabled, whether you should be able to override that and maybe add a dash space general session. Under the field settings, these are where we can configure whether we want to have the customer PO field enabled. We have the deposit field enabled. We have the load-in date enabled. We do not have rehearsal date or event date or doors date. So all these are configurable whether you want to turn them on or off. Under the numbering tab is where you can configure whether you want to use numbers, what numbering scheme you want to use, etc. On the dates and times, right now we have called the start date ship date. We have said that it is required and it has a time component, and we want it to default to 8 a.m. And then the end date is called return date. We have many people who leave those settings as they are. We've got other customers who change this up and maybe have the start date called gear prep because they want availability to be calculated based on when they want to start prepping this show, not when it ships. So by just changing this to gear prep, that would change the overall functionality of the system. Instead of saying ship date, it would say gear prep, etc. So those are some of the configurations on what is displayed inside the edit header area. Now, once we open and start our quote, what you'll see is that there is now an edit header link right here. And this will tell you, or this will allow you to go back and modify the header area in the quote. So if we want to get back to the header area, we just hit edit header.